talk about Thriving Thursday. It's a little bit about wellness and thriving. But the question you might be asking is, what does thriving mean in our current world, right? There are lots of advice available. You go on LinkedIn, go on YouTube, go on Facebook, any social media or book or anything, you would find enough advice on how to thrive, how to manage your well-being, and so on and so forth. Well-being has become a biggest industry, one of the biggest industry, and it's thriving. The industry is thriving. But when something becomes an industry, things start to change in a different way. And at some point in time, you will see that the advice that we start to receive kind of loses its mojo in some way. So what's the traditional advice? If you ask someone for wellness or thriving in current world, what kind of advice you would see, you will get that. So one of the advice typically you would see that, believe in yourself. How do you do that? It's a benign advice. It's not necessarily a negative advice, but it's something you can't easily action. Or something like take care of yourself. It's very simple. But what do you mean by take care of myself? Do I eat more? Do I eat less? Do I sleep more? Do I sleep less? Work more? What exactly that mean? And it would mean different things for different people. Circumstances are different for everyone. Their rhythms are different. Their aspirations are different. Everything, the background and whatnot. So this advice, this generic thing, starts to lose. And then people try for some time and then say, well, it doesn't work. Result is we all are stressed. We all find ourselves cornered at some point in time in our life, and we see no hope. We see, well, this is how things are. I don't know how to handle things. And that's where I keep saying all the time that it's not the problem that bothers us. It's not the problem that bothers us. It's our inability to handle that problem bothers us. If you know how to solve a problem, problems don't trouble you. If you're in a traffic jam, and if you know how to get out of it, it won't bother you. So it's less about the problem, more about our ability to handle that problem. So the question is, how do you actually build that ability? Is it an intelligence of some kind? Is it a skill? What is it? And to elaborate on that, I would like to tell you a story of a hot dog seller. So this interesting hot dog seller, he used to sell hot dogs in a busy corner of a street, and he was very hardworking, by the way. Very uneducated hot dog seller. He had a small hop there. He would sell hot dogs. He will shout. He will give out pamphlets. He will invite people and then market himself. Like he didn't have any particular degree or anything. He was just hardworking guy. And his business was growing to a point that he was thinking of adding another branch, some kind of, and he was increasing his bun orders, hot dog orders, number of things. So it was going well in a way for that hot dog seller. His son was in some big shot management school. He recently finished. The son came back home for holiday, and he was about to finish his management degree. So hot dog seller one day asked him that, son, look, you are finishing your education, so why don't you join me? Our business is thriving. Maybe you can take it even further with your knowledge. Son says, no, Dad, I'm not interested, But even I think you should stop doing it. So Dad was confused, like, why should I stop doing it? This is such a wonderful business. He says, no. Recession is coming. Right? Economy is going downturn. Like there's downturns, economy is going bust, recession is coming. You should get out of this business as soon as you can. So this guy was partially blind, the hot dog seller. He was partially deaf. He wasn't really a TV listener, TV watcher, or radio listener, or a newspaper reader. He would just go on common sense. So he said, well, my son is intelligent. He did the management course from a prestigious institution. So he might be right. I should listen to him. And so he started thinking, and as he thought further, he started to reduce his bun orders because he wanted to wind up the business. So he started to reduce bun orders. Instead of marketing every single day, standing on the corner of the street and inviting more people, he just started not doing it. Sometimes he will do it, sometimes he won't. He was just thinking all the time, recession is coming. So bun orders reduced, he wouldn't market, less people started to appear in front of his shop. And well, he wasn't really interested, he wasn't that caring. So even people didn't see much point in coming a long distance just to eat hot dogs from him. And so the cycle continued. So he had to reduce his bun orders even further. Everything started going down. And one day in the evening, he goes to his son saying, "Son, you are right. Recession is coming. Yeah, I can see businesses going down." And that's an interesting anecdote here because a lot of times we think that intelligence is wisdom. It's not. Intelligence is not wisdom. Wisdom comes from a very different practical experience. And the reason why I'm telling you this story is you will find lots of intelligent people across the board on social media, online, offline, everywhere, who will give you that advice. They might be intelligent, but finding the person who has that wisdom is very difficult exercise. And you can't risk your well-being for that. So we have to be very cautious. I'm not saying don't listen to anybody. I'm saying listen, but have that filter where you're not simply blindly following. You're evaluating that feedback. You're evaluating whatever is being said to you. And that means we have to start being self-sufficient in many ways. There's an interesting experiment that's done in 1950s actually, by a psychologist. It was, I think, a British psychologist, Solomon Asch. And he conducted an experiment. It was conformity experiment. It's called conformity experiment. And so as you could see in this image, there were a bunch of there was one subject and there were a bunch of other control participants. And the experiment was that participants had to look at the left line on the left side, and say out loud a number which is equal to that line. So look at A and tell me which line resembles line number same as A. And as you would watch this video, this is available on the internet, all other controlled participants were told to give a wrong answer. So the idea was first they would give right answers a couple of times, and eventually as the experiment progresses, they would give wrong answer. So the subject, the person who was actually put to the control test, he also started giving wrong answers. He knew, like you could see on his face, there's a video on it, you could see on his face that he is confused that why they're giving wrong answer. But social pressure. He is not thinking for himself. He can say that, well, everybody is saying different line. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they're right, and maybe this is the right answer. And so that experiment essentially proved that when we try to please others, when we try to kind of adjust in the society, we start to make wrong decisions. At some point, they may affect us negatively. Sometimes they are just benign. But we wouldn't know which is which until the result appears. And which is why it is important for us not to follow any recipe blindly. Whether it is, again, online, offline, wherever. You see some advice, don't just follow that advice. First understand how and why it is being said, what's the context, etc. And then tailor it to your circumstances. That's a much better approach to go forward. Now, learning about yourself or your mental model is critically important. Like how I think, right? How you think. Everybody thinks slightly differently. They have their own ways of thinking because the backgrounds are different. Like I'm an engineer by training, but I've also got experience in other fields. So when I try to think about something, I think in that particular thinking model. I start to think in that particular way and arrive to a conclusion, arrive to choices or decisions. And it would be different for different people. So I cannot simply copy somebody's thinking. So if you look at how we learn, how we actually think, it's important to look at a circular model that I usually put. It's called as an MTPO model. So it's a mindset where we have certain hypotheses, we have certain way of thinking, and that mindset actually leads our thinking. This thinking essentially drives our behavior. So we behave in a certain way because we think in a certain way, and we think in a certain way because our mindset is of certain opinion. But what happens as a result of that behavior is we get the outcome, right? So when we behave, something happens, and whatever has happened now either reinforces our thinking, our mindset, or it says, no, it's not working. So think about the hot dog seller's example. He was thinking that my son is right, and whatever he's saying, I should follow. And if I reduce my orders, if I reduce my efforts, then I would be less impacted by the recession, so-called recession that's coming. And that changes thinking in a way which resulted into a behavior which led to an outcome. And he kind of reinforced that thinking that, yes, you're right, recession is coming. He could have thought it differently, that there was no controlled experiment just to see that what if I didn't do that, what would change? And that's what I think we miss a lot of times, that we think we see one outcome and we start to build our mindset in a certain way. But we don't think, what if there was another alternative? We don't think why this worked and why this didn't work. We don't think how would things turn out if certain variables, certain actions are changed. And which is why this last loop, the last section of outcome to mindset change is very critical. Outcome doesn't necessarily immediately result into mindset. Between outcome that you see and between you change your mindset, there has to be a step called reflection. We have to reflect cautiously and consciously at why things work certain way, why things don't work certain way, how they work, and so forth. That reinforces or improves our mental model, the way we look at things. And that improvement then results into better thinking. That better thinking then again moves into a positive direction, gives us a better behavioral model. So this is how we think, and this is how it affects our well-being or everything that we do essentially. But there's also other thing in which people often ask me that how do you, as in myself, keep so calm in stressful situations, and particularly when people give you feedback, critical feedback, positive, negative, anything. And so that I have seen a lot of people in a way struggle because that any sort of feedback seems a bit obtrusive. It pushes people in a corner, and that affects their mental model, that affects their thinking. A lot of times I've seen people, they'll receive a little tiny bit of a feedback and their whole day just goes off. They just don't like what they're doing, at least for the day. If it is much serious feedback, a lot of times people change things significantly and may not be in their favor. So how do you essentially improve your feedback? How do you actually work on the feedback, right? And so I have a simple model which you can use, you can utilize right away. And the first rule with the feedback I always talk about is don't care about the feedback without this one important step. You receive a feedback, don't just start thinking on it immediately. Don't just start acting on it immediately. Have that reflection piece in here. And how do you reflect on a feedback? So here's a 2x2 matrix, very easy to follow. Think about it. The first question I would ask myself is, have I asked for this feedback, or is this somebody giving me on their own? Is it solicited feedback or is it unsolicited feedback? Asked or not asked? And at the same time, I'm trying to evaluate, or I'm trying to see the person who is giving me this feedback, are they an expert on the subject, or they're not an expert? If I have not asked for the feedback, if the person is not really an expert, I really don't need to think about it. I simply ignore it. But a lot of times you will see what happens is we ask for feedback to non-experts, such as your friends, your family members. We think that, hey, look at this thing, look at how I've written something, look at the thing I have created. What do you think about it? They're not an expert, but we did ask for it, right? And that's where I think we have, even if they give a feedback that probably we don't like, we might need to use that as a data point. It's not the completely true feedback per se, but it's something worth putting in order to think about at a larger scale. So we can take a step back and think like how many people are saying the same thing, and then make conclusion based on that. Not just one friend said something, but maybe all your friends are saying the same thing, then probably the data shows you something. If only one friend says, it may be just an outlier. But the flip side of that is when you ask, when you haven't asked the feedback, but an expert is giving that feedback to you. And it happens a lot of times. There are well-wishers who are experts. I haven't asked for it, but they come back and say, hey, you know what? I have seen this thing, and this is something you should improve. This is something you should change. And if I know the person is expert, I haven't asked for it, I must thank him or her for their generosity of giving that feedback without asking. And I should consider it. I necessarily don't need to act on it, but it's a valuable contribution. It's a valuable input. It becomes one of the part of the consideration in my view. And then this one, the top right one, is very, very simple to think about. You ask for the feedback, somebody gave you that feedback, they are an expert. What is to think about? You need to act on it. You need to take that feedback and work on it. So when I started to filter any feedback that is coming to me, things started to change, because then the stress level, then the mental well-being, the way I would think, and then I would spend my day just because of that feedback, it started to change. Because now I would just take the feedback, don't do nothing, and just first step, I would simply categorize it, saying, is it something I asked for? Is it coming from an expert? Blah, blah, blah. Take on these 4 stages and see what do I need to do. And based on this classification, if I need to do something, consider data or etc., I'll just simply do it. There's no personalization. There's no personal touch to it, so that I don't get swayed by emotions. Feedback is then taken very, very objectively. That helps. So this is second. So first one is to improve our awareness, understand how we think, understand how we learn from our mistakes or other positive things. Second is how do we respond to certain feedback or comments from other people. And the third thing that we need to do is create a gap. Create a gap between ourselves, our mental models, and then somebody else's mental model, your mental model or people around us. Because one thing is sure, like I said before, people come from different backgrounds. So how they think versus how you think may not be the same. So a lot of times there is a friction, there is disagreement. We don't necessarily agree or like things just the same as others, and that frustrates us. But if I understand that there is a gap between how I think and how others think, and consciously I know that, no, I'm not wrong, maybe they are right, but I don't have to necessarily agree on it. But I can understand why they're saying what they're saying, or I can understand why somebody has a particular point of view. So there is a gap between my thinking and somebody else's thinking. As long as I have this gap and I'm not emotionally involved, things get better. So while building our own self-awareness, knowing ourselves how we think, can take a little bit longer. But I recommend you start thinking, start writing, and start doing that objectively as well as cautiously and consciously, so that you know how you think, what are your linchpins and those things. Feedback is very easy to implement. It can be done as soon as you want to. And creating this gap is probably the second step to your knowing yourself, your thinking model. But once we do all three things, once we know ourselves, learn to respond to the feedback and create this gap, I think we become more resilient. We become almost untouchable at the emotional level. Nobody can make you think without your permission. And that, I think, is a very big superpower. Everybody should have it, you should have it, and that's how things should be. So happy Thursday again. Thank you so much for the opportunity. If you'd like to connect with me, if you have any questions, just Google my name. That should appear, and that should be it. Thank you.